Hello Medfield, thank you for watching Happenings in Medfield and especially the Town Hall. Today my visitor is Mike Marcucci. He is the current chairman of the Board of Selectmen. He's going to tell us how the heck he got to that position and if he likes it or not, and then talk about what's going on in Town Hall, but specifically at the Selectmen's meetings and what's going on with town government. So Mike, let us know, how did you get to be a Selectman?
Well, fortunately I was elected by the people of the town of Medfield in 2016. Before that I had been a member of the Warrant Committee and was chairman of the Warrant Committee, and I was in my second year as chairman when Richard Disorder decided not to run for re-election as a selectman. I really hadn't been thinking about running, and then he decided not to run, and there had been no other candidates who had been really stepped up at that point, and so I started to think maybe I could do it, and put my name out there, and I got elected, and here I am.
There you go. Any regrets?
None at all. No, it's been great. I mean, I think you and I have talked about this before, that Warrant Committee is great fun.
I loved it.
It's a great committee to be on.
I loved it.
And, so I certainly missed that aspect of it,
I did
but
too.
I enjoy being a selectman, and I enjoy being able to contribute to the town in this way, and hopefully so far so good.
I thought the Warrant Committee was terrific. I was chairman in the first 3 years of Proposition 2.5, and we had to meet a couple times a week. We built build all the budgets up from ground zero. If we were starting a police department today, what did we have to have? And it took us forever.
I can imagine.
But I learned an awful lot about the town budgets that I never would have learned any other way. And we didn't agree on anything. It was great. No, it's the way it should be.
Right, that's right.
We're supposed to represent different people. So the votes would be 6-3, 4-5, 2-7, you know, who knows? And we ended up being such good friends. We went to dinner all the time. It was very, very good. It was the most healthy disagreement I've ever had.
I had a similar experience. So if you're interested in serving the town, feel free to volunteer for the Warrant Committee.
I know,
because
I
it's a great
agree.
committee, so.
Don't ever turn it down.
Yeah.
So what's going on now?
Well, I guess we had our last meeting of the summer this past Tuesday. We had a pretty busy summer with the Board of Selectmen. I think probably the issue that has consumed most of our time over the past few months is Medfield State Hospital.
Absolutely.
And what we're going to do with respect to the hospital, and how to bring what's been a 4-year master planning process to a conclusion, and then have something that can be presented to the town. So we had, between June and July, we had a number of meetings specific to the hospital, and then in our regular meetings we had additional discussions about the hospital, trying to sort out what the next step was for the board and what the next step will be for the town.
When do you think it'll actually come to town?
Well, so we agreed in our meeting in July. I think our July 17th meeting probably had the most robust discussion about this, that the board decided, the majority of the board decided that once the Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee completed their proposed reuse plan, which they did on August 21st, and they have provided an extensive plan, and they have put an extraordinary amount of time and effort and really good work into thinking through the plan and coming up with what they believe is a coherent and strong vision for the future of the hospital. That we, as the Board of Selectmen, we decided that once the Master Planning Committee finished their work, that we wanted the majority of the board wanted kind of a new look, a second look, to get a little more input from developers. Okay. And so throughout the master planning process, various folks have suggested the possibility of issuing what's called a request for information, or an RFI,
Right.
which is a relatively short document, and it will ask for input from developers on the master plan, on the proposed zoning for the Medfield State Hospital site, and how it can be improved, how it might be adjusted, if the developers have other ideas and suggestions that we haven't thought about or that might make the plan stronger, or any pitfalls in the existing master plan. So we had decided on our July 17th meeting, the board voted to issue an RFI, and at our most recent meeting on August 21st, we appointed a development committee whose initial responsibility will be crafting this RFI. So we appointed 5 members of that development committee which likely will continue to be involved in the development process after the RFI, but the initial task for the development committee is the development of the RFI and then the evaluation of any responses we get from developers to that RFI.
And I hope it happens. I hope
And
I
so-
live to see something
Yeah,
happen
well,
up there.
So as to your question on the timing, the schedule we laid out, we're going to try to complete that RFI and issue it by our meeting on September 18th. And so it'll be an RFI issued by the Board of Selectmen. That development committee, which will meet starting whenever the interim chairman calls the committee together, will meet over the course of the next month. We likely will have them into a Board of Selectmen meeting during that time and figure out what this RFI is going to say, what are the questions we're going to ask, and then they're going to, the most of the committee are real estate professionals, people who do real estate for a living and have experience in the area.
Yes,
And
that's
so
good.
they will work on what the RFI will say, what the questions will be. So we agreed that September 18th we would issue that RFI, and then the return date for it would be October 30th. So we would give developers 6 weeks to respond. Unlike an RFP, a request for proposals, this is much less detailed.
Absolutely.
And the amount of work that a developer would have to put into it, to comment on it, to provide input, is a lot less. And so I think the committee will be deciding exactly to whom this RFI will be sent. But that 6-week period, we think, and the committee could always come up with a different recommendation in terms of the schedule if they think a little more time is necessary. We thought 6 weeks was a reasonable amount of time to get some input, to get some response. Once those responses come in on October 30th, then there'll be a period of time where that development committee will analyze those responses, consider the information, consider the device provided in those RFI responses. And then we agreed as Board of Selectmen, we were going to try to decide in December what the board is going to do. And really what that is when are we going to call a special town meeting, and what are the questions we're going to put to the voters at the special town meeting. And on that schedule, a special town meeting on the hospital likely would take place in March.
Okay.
And so it's close in time to the annual town meeting. We have done that before, but I think the consensus, the consensus of the board was that this was a significant enough issue that it should not be something that's put on the annual town meeting warrant. It should have its own
I agree.
town
We
meeting.
always thought that.
Yeah. And so that's kind of assuming that the result of the RFI process is a consensus from the board about what to do and what exactly will be proposed to the town meeting. And there's a range of options. And so one thing that the town meeting absolutely has to decide with respect to the hospital is what is the zoning going to be? What are the zoning bylaws going to be for the hospital? Currently it's zoned, I believe, industrial extensive, or IE, which is limited to, as you might, kind of very relatively heavy business or industrial
Correct.
uses. If there's going to be residential developments there or other types of developments, we're going to have a different zoning. The hospital committee, and I would encourage everyone to go out and read the master plan and read the portions of the master plan, particularly on the zoning, has proposed sort of a zone-based zoning up there with different sections of the land zoned in different ways. So the special town meeting will have to vote on zoning. It's required under law that it's a town meeting issue. It would follow on a hearing from the planning board. The other question is, will we also put some sort of disposition article on the warrant?
Yeah.
And so I think in the discussions that we had with the master planning committee, I don't think we necessarily reached a consensus about what would have to happen at the initial special town meeting. It may just be that we would do the zoning first and we would present sort of the general vision for it and the vision that would be implemented by the zoning. Or you could also pair that with an authorization to dispose of some or all of the land consistent with the zoning or consistent with the master plan or consistent with whatever the town meeting decides. And so you could take this in a two-step process and do the zoning at one town meeting and then try to get proposals from developers consistent with that zoning, and then you'd have to go back to another town meeting to get the disposition authority once you have a specific proposal. Or you could try to do both together. You could try to get the zoning approved for a particular vision for Medfield State Hospital and then do the disposition at the same
It's
meeting.
complicated though.
It's complicated.
It's not easy.
It's not easy.
The whole process isn't.
It's not easy, and there's a lot of moving parts, and there are questions about one of the things we talked about with the master planning committee, sort of what kind of action will, assuming the town votes for development of the hospital, but what kind of action from the town would be necessary to get developers to invest the kind of money that they would have to invest to develop a real solid proposal for that. Would it be just the zoning? Would we have to have disposition authority? Would it be both? Could he do one of the two? And that's part of what I think the development committee will be considering in the
Yeah.
process. And so they're going to be, in addition to evaluating the RFI, also advising the Board of Selectmen on exactly how we ought to try to implement this, taking the feedback from the RFI, and then what are the steps we ought to do? Do we do it in 2 steps? How do we break it up? Do we put the whole property available? Do we slice it up? How do we do it? And those are those kind of nitty-gritty questions that I think the development committee is going to help answer with the assistance of the RFI.
Yeah. Are you free to give me the names of the development committee?
Sure. The development committee members, we decided that I think one thing we've been doing lately with committees from the board is that we found it to be effective to have actually a selectman on these committees.
I agree. We did too.
And so Gus Murby is going to be on the committee. Todd Trebenko, who is currently a member of the Affordable Housing Trust Board of Trustees.
He's good too.
Johnny Martinez, Ken Richard, who
Okay,
was a
I
member
know.
of
He's
the,
very good.
yes. Ken was a member of the Master Planning Committee
was.
for a while, and Adam Amidon, who is also
Trust. Yeah.
a trustee of the Affordable Housing Trust. So we have a solid group of people who've been involved in the town and who have a background in real estate, who I think will contribute a lot to our understanding of what we need to do and to thinking through some of these detailed questions where the board thought we needed some additional advice in the process.
Because we need people that know what they're doing.
That,
Absolutely.
It's always a help. It's always a help.
Not what we want, but what's really
Right,
possible.
right.
What's a good thing to do.
Right, and this is not it's not a negative reflection on the Master Planning Committee. I think it's a recognition, as we thought through the process and, over the past few months, that that committee wasn't necessarily going to want to continue, and that the task of actually implementing the master plan, the task of actually going through the process of zoning, disposition, and the rest was, I don't want to say more tactical and less strategic, but there were a lot of nitty-gritty real estate questions, and we thought having a different committee in place to kind of deal with those disposition, development, implementation type questions would be in the overall best interest of the town. And frankly, the Master Planning Committee has put in so many hours, so much time. I don't think there's any group of people who has devoted more volunteer time and free time in the service of the town of Medfield than the members of the State Hospital Master Planning Committee.
That's great.
It's been an extraordinary effort on their part.
And can you name all of them?
I think I can.
It's a test.
I think Steve Nolan, Brandy Brandy Karg, Pat Casey, Teresa James, Gil Rogers. I think I have the 6 of them. If I'm forgetting anyone, I apologize.
I'm trying to. I think you've got them all.
I think I've got all 6. Right? Brandy, Teresa, Randy, Steve, Gil, and Pat Casey.
Yeah.
I think those are the 6. If you take a look at their master plan, it really an extraordinary amount of effort went into that. There's a lot of detail in the master plan about the history of the hospital, about different options, about the various agreements that govern the hospital land, and so I would encourage you to take a look at it. And it's extensive and detailed, and they've just put an extraordinary amount of work into it. And so
I'm sure.
the town should be very grateful to them for their efforts.
Well, good for them.
Yeah.
Because I was on the original State Hospital Reuse Committee for years. I think it was almost 30 years it ran. And we disbanded, a new committee was formed, and they're coming up with pretty much the same ideas that we came up with, which is great.
Yeah.
So maybe we weren't too far off in the first place. But
We'll
this
see.
is much more involved a search than we had.
Well, we'll see what happens.
I wish you luck with it.
Thank you.
But you've got other things to deal with. You need a new Mike Sullivan.
We do. I think, it was probably something that everybody knew was coming. And I remember, when I was looking at running for selectman the first time, based on my involvement with the warrant committee, you could see that there really was going to be a time of transition in the leadership of Medfield. And I think the first step in that was the retirement of Bob McGuire as school superintendent, being replaced by Dr. Marsden. But kind of looking ahead, you could see within the period of time you'd have to find a new head of the DPW, as Ken Feeney retired after 38 years, a new fire chief, as Chief Kingsbury was coming up for retirement, a new police chief, Chief Meany retired, and then at some point, Mike Sullivan would likely retire, and obviously we've now come to that point, and so we are in the process of considering what to do there. The board decided at a meeting back in July that before we appointed a search committee to do that, it would make sense to evaluate whether we would want to promote the assistant town administrator, Christine Truweiler, into that role first. I think we thought we all had a significant degree of confidence in her, and I know for myself personally, it didn't quite make sense to have someone who's been sort of the assistant for 19 years kind of thrown into the mix of a search with people from other towns or people who might be interested, and so that we ought to evaluate the possibility of promoting Christine first, which would save the town some money on a search consultant, and might make that process a little more efficient in the short term if the board ultimately decides to go with Christine. We'll make that final decision in September, I think probably at our meeting on September 18th.
Because when Mike came here, he was new. He came from Arlington. He knew nothing about Medfield, really.
Right.
It was really kind of fun. When the selectmen were interviewing him, I was writing for the newspaper back then, and C.B. Dowd and I were leaving, because the selectmen used to be able to say, "Leave, get out of here, press." And so we went.
Right.
There was no recordings or anything. So we left, and as we were leaving, this tall, skinny guy with brown hair opened the door for us. And CB said, "You know, I like him." I said, "I do too." That was Mike. That was Mike.
And now 44 years
44
later,
years
he's
later.
still here.
Yep,
Right.
and I'm not writing for the newspaper anymore.
Well, you've moved on to a new medium. Right? Just
Different.
like the rest of the press, you've migrated from print to TV.
Yeah, maybe. But I don't get paid for this.
Did you get paid for writing for the paper?
Yeah,
Oh,
I did.
Wow. Wow, that's
I
great.
did. I was a daily paper, absolutely.
Okay. All right. A daily paper in Medfield.
No, it was geez, isn't it, some Daily News, jeepers. It wasn't the Milford Daily News, Metro West.
Oh, the Metro West Daily News. Okay. And did
Metro
you
West
just
Daily.
cover Medfield, or?
They sent me to other towns sometimes. I also filled in for some of the weeklies.
Oh, okay.
The hometown weekly I filled in
great.
for sometimes. It was
That's
good. I
excellent.
learned a lot about the town and how it worked.
I can imagine. That's that. I mean, we were talking about this. We were talking about it, but that there's obviously been a great decline in local journalism and coverage of local
Absolutely.
government, and I think we're fortunate right now. The reporter who covers us for the Medfield Press does an excellent job and comes to our meetings, and it makes a real difference in getting information about the town and what's happening in the town out to
does.
the people. It's harder to get that information if you're not attending the meetings or watching on YouTube or watching this show. And in fact, we had a discussion at one of our meetings recently about how can we improve the distribution of information to people in the town. And it was an interesting discussion because on the one hand, I think all the selectmen agree we want to do a better job making it possible for people to find out what's going on.
Absolutely.
At the same time, we don't want to create a lot of new additional work. And so I think this show, when Mike is here, and hopefully I can help a little bit on this front, is a great way to do it. And we also thought about different ways using our new website in town, a new town website, that we can take advantage of some of its features to kind of push out information. So I would say to people watching who are looking for more information on what's going on in town that you can sign up on the website for alerts and notices.
I get
and you can get, and unfortunately only about 150 people are signed up right
You're
now.
kidding me.
All told, and so I would encourage people to do that. You can sign up for as much or as little as you want. You can
Yeah.
get the notices of meetings, you can get the materials that are posted, and it's a really good way to keep updated. And I think we're going to keep thinking about different ways to provide more information to people and make information accessible, because there's a lot there. You know, between the Medfield TV YouTube channel, between the website, there's a lot there. But we got to make sure it's navigable and make sure people can kind of find out what they want to find out, because with really just the two papers coming out once a week, it's hard to keep up on everything that's going
Absolutely.
on with that. So thank you for this show, because this is a big help to
I think the
people as well.
site's much better than the last one. I think it's much easier to work around, and I think it's much more informative than it was before.
I think that's right, and we've been making an effort in Town Hall, and Christine Truwell and others in Town Hall, making an effort to kind of make sure to train the different department heads as well, and how to use the website, what features it has, so they can get information posted up there in a relatively timely way. I know, you and I are on the Affordable Housing Trust Board together, and I think we've done a pretty good job. We want to keep doing a better job
We're trying.
of having updated information, having status reports for people who are interested in those kind of issues. They can kind of go to one spot on the website, get an update of without necessarily having to go through all the minutes of every meeting. Here's a general status, and then you can kind of dig in more deeply as you'd like to. So constantly trying to improve. If people have suggestions, please let us know. But thank you for doing the show, because this is a big help too.
Well, that's one of the reasons we're doing it.
Right.
And you've got a new police chief coming.
We will have a new police chief. We have formed a police chief search committee that is underway. We awarded a contract a couple of meetings ago to Badge Quest, which is a consulting firm that has helped the town in the past
Right.
with our fire chief search, and I believe they helped us with our police chief search when we hired Chief Meany as well. And they run a very professional search operation. They help in vetting of resumes. They help in crafting the job description, which is always going to be updated a little bit. It's been 12 years since we hired a police chief. And they also run what's called an assessment center. which is really one of the centerpieces of their hiring
I
process.
understand that, I remember that.
It's a day-long process at Town Hall that puts the candidates through simulations and kind of dealing with on a role-playing basis.
Absolutely. What
the
would you
issues,
do?
you know, you have something has happened, you've got 5 minutes to write a press release on it. How do you handle it? And I think both in the fire chief search and I think in the police chief search back in 2006, people found it to be a very helpful process. So we're going to go through that again. I think we've set a target date. We'd like to find a new permanent police chief by the beginning of next year. In the meantime, we are very fortunate that Deputy Chief John Wilhelmy is able to step in as interim police chief. Chief Meany had elevated him to the deputy chief's role a couple of years ago, and so far that's been a seamless transition. That's made it a lot easier to kind of keep things going as it has been as we go through this search.
Well, John's been around for a long time, and he lived here, so, I mean, he
Yes.
knows the town very well, I think.
As well as anyone, right?
But I think we'll miss Bob Meany, and certainly we missed a lot of them over the years. Certainly the fire chief in Kingsbury, he's a loss too. And we appointed them when I was both of them when I was a selectman, and we had Joe Ryan on and Bill Mann, who were both terrific. They were really good guys.
Yeah. No, we've been very fortunate with Chief Meany and fortunate with Chief Kingsbury, and I think with our newly hired fire chief, Chief Carrico, I think hopefully he's going to step right into that line and be another strong public servant for the town.
You know, the fun thing when we appointed Kingsbury and Meany is they used to ride motorcycles together, and they were in the same class at Medfield High School, which is really fun when you think about it.
Right.
And I asked Bob, because Bill wasn't too comfortable being interviewed on television, but I asked Bob Meany, did he and Bill ever think they would end up getting off their motorcycles into Town Hall? And he laughed. He said it never occurred to them when they were kids. I'm sure it wouldn't.
Right.
You wouldn't think of it.
Right.
You're having fun, you're riding a motorcycle, you're dating and going to school.
Next thing you know, you're the police chief in the class.
Who would ever guess it?
Right. Right.
So what other big issues do you have?
Well, you know, we are looking at having a special town meeting this fall as well. And we'd originally mapped out the Medfield State Hospital schedule. We had thought that the goal was to get to a town meeting this fall, the fall of 2018. With the RFI process, that's going to take a little bit more time. We're not going to be able to keep to that. But we have a couple of other projects in the works that we intend to present to a special town meeting in the fall. I think the centerpiece of it, or the highlight of it, will be in attempting to make some progress on senior housing. You know, this is something that, going back to, you know, as some people know, we have a townwide master plan from 1964. There was a partial update to that master plan in 1997. One of the things that master plan identified was a lack of appropriate housing for seniors in 1997. When we did our housing production plan, which was drafted originally in 2012 and adopted in 2016, that also identified a lack of appropriate housing for seniors. The town meeting a couple of years ago appointed a senior housing study committee that Tony Santori led and conducted a study and a survey.
I was on that.
And you were on that committee. And that committee identified, I think, the same issue, that there's a shortage of good options for seniors in town who want to stay in town but might like to downsize but stick around and want to have the right kind of layout and the right kind of place. So we've been looking at that issue and trying to work on that issue to see how we can move it forward to encourage the development of what are really kind of smaller senior appropriate units with first floor entrances. In some of the affordable housing developments we've done over the past couple of years, we've tried to work with the developers to make some of the apartment units, for example, first floor units that are kind of more appropriate for seniors. We've done that in a couple of the developments. But I think what we're going to put on the table, hopefully, depending on what happens to the planning board, is we've drafted an overlay district, a senior housing overlay district, which would be townwide. It would have certain criteria, zoning criteria, that would encourage the development of senior housing in locations that fit within the overlay district. So there's a handful of locations covered by it that would permit essentially a higher density of senior appropriate units. It would have to be by special permit through the planning board, so any developer looking to take advantage of the overlay district would have to come forward with a plan, presented to the planning board, and would have to meet the criteria of the special permit.
But there's always 40B.
Always
40B
This
out
would not
there.
be 40B.
I know.
This would be separate from 40B. Other towns have done this. Franklin has done this. Millis has done this, I believe.
And Millis has a nice one.
To encourage senior housing development. So that'll be a zoning proposal that, if the planning board approves and advances it to town meeting, that'll be on the warrant in the special town meeting in the fall. And then in connection with that, the Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee, which also for a time was looking at the potential reuse of Lot 3 in the Hinckley property, had identified the Hinckley property, which for those of you who are not familiar with it, is essentially the land near the senior center on Ice House Road, kind of across the cul-de-sac from the Kingsbury Club, and identified a portion of that land as appropriate for a relatively small development of senior appropriate housing. And so in conjunction with the overlay district, we also will be putting a warrant article on this special town meeting warrant for the disposition of the Hinckley property for the development of senior housing. And so consistent with the zoning provided in the overlay district, if that passes, we would be proposing somewhere between 16 and 24 small houses, however you define the houses. They'd be 2-bedroom in general, first floor master, kind of no step entry, and on small lots. But that would be, because of their size and location, would probably command a lower price than a lot of houses in Medfield, but from a physical setup would be appropriate for seniors. And then that's not a 40B project, it's not an affordable housing project the way the state defines it, but it would be a senior housing development to try to create some of these additional units. Because other than Turtlebrook, we really don't have any real senior specific developments in town. Certainly not of kind of an ownership, kind of single family house variety. So those are going to be the two big issues. We have some other issues that will be on the warrant as well of things we're looking at, in particular with respect to speed limits.
That's a big one.
It's a big one, and it's sort of been an ongoing discussion between the Board of Selectmen and the Chief of Police about speeding enforcement in town. And I think the board has been encouraging increased speeding enforcement. I think people around town recognize that people drive very fast in places they shouldn't be driving very fast. And as part of that effort to improve that aspect of our quality of life, in the Municipal Modernization Act that Governor Baker put through the legislature last year, one of the changes it made is it permitted towns to adopt a local ordinance, 2 local ordinances that would permit the lowering of speed limits. And you can either lower it to 20 or 25 miles per hour. Historically, speed limits are set by the state. This provides a local option, either for safety reasons or in very dense neighborhoods, to lower the speed limits. Now, obviously, that's got to be coupled with enforcement. It's got to be coupled with an effort to make sure people are complying with those speed limits.
Right.
But if in places where it's appropriate, it allows the board to lower speed limits. So town meeting action is required to adopt these local option ordinances. And so in addition to the senior housing related issues that'll be on the warrant for this special town meeting, likely in October, we're also going to have the request to adopt the local option for speed limits as well.
I think that'll go through. People really, really want that.
I think so, and I think it's an issue that it can, no pun intended, fly under the radar a little bit, or fly over the radar. But I think when and it's not just an issue for families with children, it's also an issue for seniors who are people who might be a little slower getting across the street. And we have a lot of streets that kind of become cut-through streets, but are really through residential neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
And the reality is, even of our busier streets like North Street, most of North Street's a residential street. A lot of, my house backs up onto 109, that's a residential, 109's a residential street.
I lived on North Street over 50 years.
And people drive fast.
Oh, do they ever? Well, when I moved there, North Street was Route 27. We didn't
Okay.
have the quote new 27. That was 27, but the speeds were terrible then, and they're still terrible.
Yeah, and so I think that's something that we're looking to do, sort of a two-pronged approach. One, adopting these ordinances, and then we'll have to really look at, okay, where are we going to lower the speed limit? Where does it make sense to do that? And then also encouraging additional enforcement. I think we're obviously not looking to hassle people, or not looking to trip people up, but to try to encourage compliance with the speed limits and a recognition that we may be rushing to get someplace, but it's a real safety issue.
Yeah, it really is.
And we do, look, we've got a lot of streets with no sidewalks that are still major residential streets. And so in addition to streets where there's sidewalks and people are driving too fast, where you have no sidewalks, or on North Street where the delineation between the sidewalk and the street is not, it's not a big curb. It's not a big curb.
Not clear often.
That becomes a real safety issue. And we want to be able to make sure this is a town where people can walk around safely, where parents can feel comfortable with their kids walking around. It's one of the nice things about Medfield, especially for those of us who live in closer to the center, that you can kids can kind of walk around and have a little independence at a younger age. But if people are driving too fast, understandably, parents are not going to be too comfortable having their kids walking around. So.
We've added a lot of sidewalks in the years since I've been here, and I'm
Yes.
so glad.
Yes.
I'm so glad we did.
We'd like to keep adding more.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
I would vote for any
Yeah.
of them, because I've always had a dog, so I walk every place in the world, and you really need to have that sidewalk. And I walk my kids to school. I walk the kids to soccer practice or the library or whatever.
Yeah.
And at the sidewalks to me are one of the most important safety things you can have in a town.
Yeah, and I think it's kids and it's seniors, right? I mean, it's one thing we hear from a lot of seniors with what their preferences are for housing is a lot of seniors want to be closer to the downtown. Like they want to be in a place where they can walk to the downtown. But if you don't have sidewalks, then
Right.
People have a little trouble with mobility. You might be able to walk on the sidewalk, but may not feel comfortable walking just on the side of the street, particularly if people are zipping around at
Absolutely.
45 or 50 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So we'll see what we can do.
Well, I hope you do it all. What else is on your agenda now?
Well, those are kind of the big issues. We obviously have the town administrator and police chief issue, Medfield State Hospital. We adopted last spring. We've adopted some new approach to some of our capital and long-term budgeting. So we've adopted financial policies around our capital, with the idea that we're trying to get a consensus and agreement on handling some of our long-term obligations. Last year, both at town meeting and then in the override vote, the town voted to create this municipal building stabilization fund that would dedicate funds every year to maintaining our buildings. And so we're now moving into this budget cycle, which will be the first year with our new capital policies. We've kind of shifted the timing of our capital budgeting. Historically, we've done our capital budgeting sort of at the end of the budget cycle, and what we're going to do now is we're trying to move it to the front of the budget cycle, so that because I think what had happened over time is with the capital budget and these other items being at the end of the budgeting cycle, it kind of fell victim to the sort of end of budget cycle efforts to kind of get everything under Prop 2.5 and get everything into the budget. And so we sometimes would make, I think, sort of short-term decisions about long-term projects. And we realized when we did this capital facilities review that Jerry McCarty did and capital plan, we had a significant amount of unfunded and deferred maintenance on a lot of our buildings, mostly our
Absolutely.
school buildings. And partially that was a function of kind of gradually whittling away at our capital budget. So what we're going to do now is the capital budget will be set at the beginning of the budget cycle, and it will sort of be untouchable, right? We've agreed this is the amount that we need to spend this year to keep our buildings up, keep our roads up, make sure we're replacing our vehicles on a proper schedule. And that way, that's not going to fall victim kind of at the end to kind of the last minute changes leading up to town meeting. And the same will be true under this new capital policy for our contributions to our stabilization fund, which is the general stabilization fund, which is sort of the town savings account, and also contributions to the OPEB trust fund. And so we have, since 2010, the town has been making an effort to whittle away at the significant unfunded liability that we have for our retired employees' health care. And so very few towns historically, if any, had kind of set aside money for this. As the cost of healthcare has gone up, a lot of towns have been confronted with the fact that they've made commitments to their retired employees to fund their healthcare benefits, and mostly healthcare benefits, some other insurance benefits, after their retirement, but hadn't set aside money for it. And so since 2010, we've been setting aside money for it in this capital policy or long-term expense policy, financial policy. We have formalized that commitment to maintaining the contributions to the OPEB trust, hopefully increasing them over time. And we've tried to adopt kind of additional efforts to account for the true cost of the hiring that we do. So for example, in the override that was passed last spring to upgrade our fire department to an ALS level, paramedic level capabilities, a piece of the cost that was baked into that override is money for the OPEB, for the cost of the retirement, the health benefits for the additional 4 paramedic firefighters that we'll be hiring to implement this. And so we've accounted for that in that, so we're not kind of racking up an unfunded liability that will be added to the contribution we make to the trust fund. So I think this will be our first year with that new process and trying to think through how we address and look at some of our budgeting issues will be in a continued discussion. Gus Murby is going to put together kind of a worksheet for a way of thinking about how to thinking about some of our budgets and how to allocate kind of the additional revenue that comes in via Prop 2.5 that we've been discussing. And so I think we've made some efforts over the last year or so to formalize some of these policies, to improve some of our policies, so some of these budget processes will work more smoothly in the future, and we can make sure, whether it's our buildings or vehicles or roads, that we're properly accounting for our capital expenses, and we don't have a surprise, and we're not kind of underfunding our capital expenses, because those are the kind of things that they're hidden. Right, you think you can always defer another year. Suddenly the roof falls in, and now you have a much bigger expense than you had.
About 10 years ago, the selectmen were invited to tour the Dale Street School when all the talk began to going what was going to happen at Dale Street. I was appalled at the condition down there. Have you ever been down in the basement or down?
I have.
And I thought, oh my God, my kids all went to that school, and I was substitute teacher for a while, and I thought, holy mackerel, it was really, really let go, and that was years and years of just letting things go, letting the money going to other causes. And I asked Mike Sullivan how it happened. He said he thinks a lot of the problem was the state gives money to schools for new construction, but not for keeping the existing construction in good shape.
That's right. And what happened is about 10 years ago, the state changed the formula.
Oh, did they ever?
So the state used to pick up a lot bigger chunk of the
Yes,
cost for the schools,
I know.
and so there wasn't the incentive to do it. If the state was going to pay for 2/3 of the cost of a new school, well, if your sort of school building is kind of falling down, well, you just get a new school. It's gotten a lot harder to do that.
Yep.
I'm glad you brought up Dale Street, because that's another big issue we'll be facing as a town this year and in the future. We'll be in the process of doing a feasibility study for a new Dale Street school, whether it's a renovation of the old building or a construction of a new school. The feasibility study will tell us sort of what is the more economical option, and then the state has to approve. The state building authority has to approve whichever option they think is most economical and most efficient for the town's future. That was obviously passed as part of the override last spring, and that'll be the first money actually spent from the Municipal Building Stabilization Fund will be for the Dale Street School feasibility study, and that proceeds kind of on the state's schedule. Yeah. So we're hopeful. I think the hope is to have that feasibility study done this winter. Whether we're going to be in a position to come back to a vote or something on that is unclear, but that's going to be a major issue. We have appointed a building committee. We're following the state MSBA, Mass School Building Authority process for that, and that'll be a big issue for the town this year and really for the next several years. That'll be the next big building project on the horizon.
I like what they did to the memorial school, though. When my youngest son was there in kindergarten and first grade, the ceiling was going in. And I'm telling you, there were buckets of water every place in a bad storm. It was crazy.
Yeah. Right, and we have to make sure with respect to our other buildings, I mean, when we did the 3 schools in 2001 to 2003, that's coming up on 15 years since. Yep. And so there's maintenance there that needs to be done. And so that's why I think it was so important and so thoughtful of the town to create and fund this municipal building stabilization fund.
I hope so. I really hope so.
Because we're not always going to be able to get a new school if there's a problem. And I think if we can get ahead of some of our maintenance issues and deal with those early rather than late,
absolutely, you got my
we'll
vote.
save ourselves a lot of money in the long run. And so that'll be I think that'll be a good long. It hurts a little bit. It hurts a little bit in the short term. I think it won't hurt as much in the long term as it would if we didn't do it.
I agree totally.
And that's another piece of this Municipal Modernization Act. Towns weren't allowed to do it before, so we weren't allowed to create sort of dedicated streams of revenue for these kind of purposes. The MMA allows us to do that, and it goes into this Municipal Building Stabilization Fund. It can only be used for those purposes, and so it really ensures that, again, that's not going to fall victim to kind of short-term kind of budget concerns. You're going to have to deal with this in the long run, and I think that'll be a good thing for the town in the long run.
We've got a couple things to do, don't you, this year?
We have some busy stuff going on. We're not going to lack for activity, but it's interesting, and hopefully we can kind of keep making some progress and keep contributing to the town the way so many people like you and others in the past have done so much to make this a great town where we all want to move. And that doesn't happen by accident.
I don't think we made it a great town. I think we helped keep it a great town.
Well, however you put it, I think it's not. These kind of things don't happen by accident. It's a result of choices that not only leaders in the town have made in the past, but the citizens of the town have made.
We've had some good ones in the years I've been here. We really have.
Yeah. So I think that's. Hopefully, we're kind of going to keep moving things in the right direction. There's always things we can do better, and we're always going to try to do better if we can. But if little by little each year we can do a little better, I think we can keep this town the kind of place where a lot of people want to live.
I hope so. Because I've got 3 children in this town, or 3 grown-up children, and several grandchildren in this town. So I hope it stays to be good. I really do.
I hope so too.
I want it to be good.
We'll do our best.
Okay, you have anything else to add, Mike?
I think that covers it. We've covered a lot of ground today.
Well, you certainly did.
You might have to have me back for
And
some
you're
other
shy,
stuff.
so this was unusual. Okay, people at home, thanks so much for watching Medfield TV. I hope you'll keep tuning in. And if you see Mike, tell him what a great job he did, or whatever you think. But thank you for watching Medfield TV, and I hope you keep watching and learning about what's going on in Medfield.
Thank you.